hello, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me, and we are now starting a panel session on organizational identifiers, register and their implication for the register production. And I'm welcoming my colleagues. I will shortly present them in a moment. The context of this panel is what we witnessed in the last 2 decades. When I started working in this area, organizations were not a very popular or very important level of analysis. Most of works dealt with the individual level or with regions, with countries. In the meantime, research organizations are a major focus of interest, both analytically, for example, in bibliometrics, but also on the political side. And this brought an issue, of course. We might find research organizations in IP addresses in publication or in official statistics or in other documents, but they come up with different ways of identifying and with widely different names. So this has created the issue of standardized organizational level and also of matching the organizational level with reality. So if to know in my city there is a university and a faculty of theology, it happens there to these different institutions. There is no way of knowing this without checking against organizational reality. And against first attempts or work using, for example, linguistic methods, name disambiguation, matching, etc., this is quickly leading to the creation of so-called organizational register, quality verified. So registers are places where there are listings of organizations, of their history, of their status, and usually matched with some data set of interest, like a publication data set, a patent data set, just to make some examples. And some of the examples which will be represented here in this panel are GRID and ROR for research organizations. So the idea, all research organizations worldwide should receive an unambiguous identifier. Register or data sets on higher education, such as the European Tertiary Education Register for Europe, the World Higher Education Database, or the American database IPEDS and related classification like the Carnegie, and what have been developed in Europe by the RISIS project, so the idea of an organizational register. Now, what we quickly recognized in preparing this panel is that behind the construction of an organizational register, there are a number of methodological issues which don't have a unique solutions. The first one maybe looks simple, but it's less simple as it's apparent, is how you define an organization. So what is an organization, for example, in the public sector, where not all universities are standalone organizations or have the legal right? How we deal with multi-level structures. The prime example is the US higher education, where you have different levels of structures, including state universities, which are multi-campus, private ones, which are distributed all over the states. And it matters a lot whether you decide that the organizational level is just at the group or is the individual organization, and how you count data, students, publications, mentions in ResearchGate, etc. And depending on the platform, you might have different choices. And how you deal with linked entities. Organizations don't come in isolated ways. There are lots of interconnection between universities and hospitals, and this affects enormously bibliometrics. And there are lots of affiliated centers of universities with different statutes, and again, the perimeter might vary. Not just to speak of cases like France with the extensive amount of joint labs between CNRS and universities. The second question is which organization should be included? There are at least two traditions in the register we encounter. One is about research, and the idea is we should include all organizations which perform some kind of research, which equates sometimes, or in most cases, with being present in bibliometric databases. But for example, in higher education registers are based on different rules, and you find educational institution as well, but you don't find research performing pure public research organization. So the perimeter differs depending on the goal of the register. A third core questions we met in register and how we track changes over time. Fortunately, if you stay in public research organizations, demographic change is not so big or so rapid than for companies, but nevertheless, change over time happens, and we made a study about European mergers and takeovers, and we found hundreds of them over 2 or 3 decades time. And the question is how this is tracked. We found examples where only the current status is projected in the past. So if you have University Gustave Eiffel in Paris, which has been created in 2020, it's made like it existed since a longer time, just merging the previous universities in the register. That's a convenient solution if you want to observe the current status, but economists looking to panel models would not want to do this. Another approach is linking strata, so having yearly strata or strata over 5 years and connecting institutions across a strata in a discontinuous manner. That's the way adopted usually by business register, because demography is very complicated. Another approach is documenting fully demography and mergers with a specific structure and notation, which is the most precise and most engaging. And the point I want to convey to introduce this panel is the solution adopted by register might well depend on their goal and also on consideration of trade-offs between resources and the goal of the register. And so the idea I would like to convey in the discussion is that no single organization register will be able to fit all needs or answer to these questions, will depend on the usage. So the idea I put in forward is that we will go towards an ecology of register with different purposes, with large overlaps. When we match register, for example, we match ORGREG with the World Higher Education Database, you find 90 or 95% overlap. Then the question is how you deal with non-overlapping elements and with the interconnection between these registers. So before speaking on interoperability between data sets, the question sometimes is interoperability between the parent organizational register. So the goal of this panel is very humble, is very simple, is to foster exchange of practices between projects, foster standardization of research and higher education organizations, since what we notice is that sometimes the communication already is limited between these projects. And to identify pathways to create interoperability also, because different registers target different communities. So higher education register, for example, more the higher education world, the political world. Register like ROR or GRID are more coined to scientific publications. So connecting register means also connecting different worlds and different sub-communities, while respecting the specificity of each project, because no solution will fit all needs. So what I'm proposing to my colleagues is to have 2 rounds of questions. One, to shortly describe your experiences or need in standardization at the organizational level, with reference to this question I mentioned. And then make a second round to discuss existing or potential interactions. It's my understanding that there are 2 circles in this panel, the panelists, which you see in this slide, and the external people. I see we have 52 participants. And it's my understanding that this platform, external participants can only ask questions through the chat. So please make your voice. We don't want that you are excluded because of technical issues. Now we have 6 panelists, and which represent broadly 3 cultures. So one is more the research-oriented culture, the publication-oriented. We have Maria Gould of California Digital Library, the leader of the ROR initiatives, and Andrea Reyes of CWTS University of Leiden. The second one are people more involved in standardization at the higher education level, worldwide. Andrea Cochran from International Association of University and the World Higher Education Database, and Colin Tück of the European Quality Assurance Register. And then we have 2 important stakeholders from international organizations. So the European Commission, Yann-Mael Bideau from DG Education and Culture, and Gillian Golden of OECD, both involved and interested in this standardization process. And I suggest we go in this order, so to have first the research part, the higher education, and the more political part. So I would like to give the word to Maria Gould. You have to unmute your microphone. Hopefully all this will work. Maria?
Oh, can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you.
Great, just wanted to confirm. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and thanks to everybody who is listening in. So my name is Maria Gould from California Digital Library. I lead the ROR initiative on behalf of our operating organizations, which include California Digital Library, Crossref, and DataCite. So just to briefly describe ROR and what our role is in the space of organization identifiers, ROR is an open registry of research organization identifiers and metadata. We launched the registry in early 2019 to specifically provide an open solution to the specific problem or challenge of identifying affiliations in research. So it is not the first or only registry of organization identifiers to exist, as many of the folks on this panel will speak to today, but ROR was specifically created to fill this gap in our research infrastructure, to be able to provide an open solution to identifying affiliations in research. So the crucial thing to know about ROR is that it's really a piece of metadata. It is a persistent identifier that can be used to identify research organizations in the same way every single time. We all know that organizations can have different names over time. We know that organizations can have very similar names. So the ROR ID is a persistent, unique identifier that can persistently and uniquely identify a research organization, and then can be used as part of broader research metadata to connect research outputs. So ROR was specifically designed to be a piece of metadata that can be included in metadata for DOIs for research outputs, so that we can better identify which research outputs are associated with which research organizations. So to that end, the ROR ID is supported in the DataCite schema for DOIs, as well as in the Crossref schema for DOIs. And so that's going to make it possible to identify and track these connections between research organizations and the research that they are producing. So a couple of quick notes about what makes ROR a little different in this space, and then I'll cede the time to the fellow panelists. We started the ROR registry with a donation of data from the GRID database, and we've been syncing to the GRID database ever since, with the plan that ROR would ultimately become independent of GRID and stand up on its own as the community open registry of record. So That's one of the things that really sets ROAR apart, is that it is being developed as a community project, that all of the data is fully open, as well as the tools such as our open API and public data dump, and that we are specifically focused on identifying this affiliation piece in our research infrastructure. That being said, ROAR is not meant to exist on its own in a little silo, so it's really important to understand ROAR as a kind of linking or bridging identifier. The ROAR schema maps to other identifiers that also exist for the organization. So that includes GRID as well as Wiki, Data, ISNI, Crossref, Funder Registry. And so one of the themes that I hope comes through in this panel today is about how we can better maintain and nurture those connections across these identifiers. Given that, as Benedetto was saying, there's not going to be just one. So how can we really strengthen and nurture those connections between them? So thank you very much.
That's perfect. I would like to give the word to Andrea Reyes from CWTS, who has made a huge contribution to standardization of organizational level in publication. Andrea, it's to you the word.
Benedetto. Hi, my name is Andrea Reyes Elizondo, and I work for the Center for Science and Technology Studies at Leiden University. I'm a member of the A team, and the A team is, we are the team that we are busy with the database, the address database at Leiden. So we work on, our database has, we have, of course, our own number, and then we keep track of organizations based on publications. We have been also adding organizations for patents and that are related to funding. So it's a little bit mixed match of different types of organizations. And how we handle, and in our database, we have also been adding numbers from other registries. So we have our own number, but we are also linking this to the projects that we work with. So for example, we have the number for ORGREG, which is the registry from RISIS. We also have the number from U-Multirank, which is another project that we work with. And we have also added the numbers for IPEDS, which is a number for higher education institutions in the States. It's the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. So we've been adding these numbers to try to be able to communicate with other projects. And going to the questions, the first round that Benedetto mentioned. So how we do this, how we handle the periphery of organizations is we try to look at, to include all those labs and hospitals that collaborate with a university, for example, or research organizations. But we determine the type of affiliation. So that is quite time consuming. So we just don't have one type of affiliation, but we have several types of affiliation. For example, whether an organization is a member of a network or whether it's an affiliate, so they work together, and whether there are components. So like they work very, very close together. And we have different methodologies to determine this. And we are documenting this, of course, and when we take these decisions. The hardest part is, of course, when they are, these labs are changing constantly and they're producing quite some output. So I forgot to mention this. We also, we only add organizations that have a certain threshold of output. So we don't have all the labs that are in France or in Europe. We're just checking the ones that have a sizable research output. Depends on the type of organization. We have different thresholds. And then the issue is, of course, that these organizations, they tend to merge. So we also try to keep track of that. We close when an organization, if they have merged, we close them and we open new ones. And then we also have to update all the linkages. So this is quite time consuming. But given that we are not registering all the research organizations around the world, then it's still doable. But I can imagine that the issue of dealing with demography, this can be quite time consuming. And other question, I think I've covered So we track changes over time for name, for mergers, and the linked entities. And we also have a system for keeping track of these multi-level structures. So we have three types of universities. Universities that just have, actually just two. Universities that have multi-campus, or what we call federal universities. For example, the University of California, there's several entities, but they are not, so it's sort of a network. And this is how we keep track of them. And then the issue is, of course, linking the labs to each one of these, and hospitals to one of these universities. So that is basically what we do at the A team at CEBETES.
And a goal of this panel is to put together different cultures. And if you go into tracking organization in the higher education world, you have a different context because the institutional level matters much more. So I would like to give the word to Andrea Cochran for explaining us your work and your position towards these questions. Andreas, to you.
Thank you, Benedetto. I hope you can hear me and see me. Yes, it's a wonderful pleasure to be joining you today. Indeed, my name is Andrea Cochran. I'm from the International Association of Universities. We are housed at UNESCO, at the headquarters of UNESCO in Paris. And we've been tracking the higher education landscape for 70 years now. And I'm saying 70 years because we are celebrating our 70th year this particular year, and it's of course a COVID year, so the festivities are limited, so bear with us. But anyway, so that is something that we've been doing for quite some time. First through the International Handbook of Universities, and which was a large compendium, which some of you might know, and now digitally through the World Higher Education Database, indeed. And we have been facing quite a few of the questions that Benedetto has posed to us, to this panel today. And indeed, I'd like to go into some of them, but maybe just quickly give an outline of what the World Higher Education Database is. It's a unique online reference portal that lists authoritative information on two things mainly, really. One is a comprehensive information on national higher education systems and credentials. So national information on the system. And then something that I think is far more important for this discussion today, and that is accredited higher education institutions. So a full list, global, of all the universities and other higher education institutions that are accredited or recognized by their respective national authorities. That is an important point I think we'll have to discuss a little bit later. So we are listing at the moment 20,000 HEIs, and the number keeps growing, which means that the higher education landscape keeps growing. And indeed, within the information that we provide, it goes across general information, geolocation, names of officers, names of the heads of institution, all the way down to divisions, fields of study, all kinds of other indicators and other bits and parcels of information. Now, in order to address what Benedetto, what you said in terms of multi-level structures, linked identities, how do we define an organization? And indeed, it's not easy. We are more and more coming to a conclusion that, especially when it comes to national levels, there are problems of contribution or attribution, really. For instance, the European University Institute in Italy, is it really an Italian university? Or there are American universities in the Gulf region. How do you define those? There are Russian universities in various that have campuses abroad in various other Central Asian states, etc. So we're toying with that, and indeed we have rolled out the global WED ID, which is a unique identifier attached to each HEI, one of the 20,000, every 20 of the 20,000 that we have is assigned one. And there we have indeed this kind of problem. What are the layers? for instance, if there's a parent, what to do with the constituent college. If there is, that's why we have come to the conclusion that it is the easiest to give a 6-digit number to the degree conferring institution, and then a 6-digit number to the child institution, so to speak. And then we have, and when it comes to change and historical change, then we can add up, let's say the child at university wishes to break free, then that latter 6-digit version number then becomes the unique identifier in itself. So these are questions indeed that have been we've been toiling with for quite some time, and I'm very, very happy that others are going into similar discussions. And so that is one of the many things that I'm so excited about to discuss today. In terms of what an organization is, well, we have 3 minimum requirements in order to be listed in the WED, and that is to be recognized and referenced by the national competent body, to be a degree conferring institution offering at least 4-year degrees or a 4-year professional diploma, and to have had at least 3 cohorts of graduates. That is the minimum requirement to be listed in the World Higher Education Database. In terms of your question of history, yes, it is a difficult one. We have a more narrative structure in the WED, you can see that, but in order to really change from in order to have a snapshot, at the moment, the World Higher Education Database is really a snapshot of the status quo of the higher education landscape as we know today. But in future, we do see and address that we need to go back and also offer historical data in a more standardized and accessible way. So we're working on that at the moment, to go back through the years and show also, make it accessible year by year, when was which university accredited or was not accredited. So that will give especially impetus for the whole debate on recognition and credentialing, which is, I think, something that is also very important for this debate. Now, challenges really is, and that I think goes directly to this discussion here today. I mentioned in the beginning, the WED, the predecessor, so to speak, was a compendium, was a book. A 3-dimensional piece, something that we might not even remember, and how to really transform that kind of that kind of information into a digital database that is interoperable. That has been a very big challenge, and I'm really looking forward to getting more input and possibly more points of entry for collaboration in this discussion today. There are many, many more things that we'd like to speak about. The last one is maybe what a way forward for your information. And Benedetto was asking, how do we keep consistency in such a distributed environment? We all have various different points of interest within the field of science and higher education, and we at the IEU, we are a membership organization. So besides having lots of universities being our members, we have 28 university associations covering a huge part of the higher education landscape globally. And indeed, we are now entering new discussions on a new governance model to assess or to discuss how to integrate the global WED ID that we have rolled out, the unique identifiers, within their membership data sets, and discuss governance models that will address issues of taxonomy, standardization, and compatibilities. And indeed, this is an open debate, and we welcome any other stakeholder to come on board. Thank you very much.
That's a very important and interesting institutional perspective. And as a companion, I would like to give the word to Colin Tück, who is managing a specific database which builds also on organizational identification, the database of quality assurance results in Europe. Colin, it's to you the word.
Yes, thank you, Benedetto, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, dear colleagues, participants. It's a pleasure to join you as well. ECHA is the European Quality Assurance Register for Higher Education, which is a register of quality assurance and accreditation agencies from the European higher education area that work in line with an agreed set of standards for quality assurance, the so-called European Standards and Guidelines, or ESG. And as Benedetto said, we manage a database of quality assurance results, DACA, which actually brings together quality assurance and accreditation reports and decisions from all those registered agencies, which is nearly 50 agencies at the moment. And in DACA, we have information on the quality assurance and accreditation of about 3,000 universities and higher education institutions across the European higher education area. You will find around 70,000 quality assurance and accreditation reports in there. Just to make it clear in one other way, I mean, if you compare DACA with the World Higher Education Database of the IAU, it's a real subset of that, because of course the World Higher Education Database includes all higher education institutions that are accredited in line with national regulations, whereas DACA includes those that are really quality assured in line with the agreed European quality assurance standards that were developed in the Bologna process. And it's quite closely linked to the policy goal of automatic recognition in the Bologna area, which is based on this harmonized quality assurance standards. For the purpose of DACA, we obviously need to identify and manage higher education institutions and some basic data on higher education institutions. And especially it's very important for us because we quite often have a situation that different quality assurance or accreditation bodies, even from different countries, might be submitting data and reports on the same higher education institution. So it's really important for us to keep a consistent data set there, avoid duplication, and so on and so forth. More than that, of course, it's also very relevant to link externally and to be able to link up with other initiatives and other data sets in Europe. So what are the most important characteristics for us? Of course, it's very important that identifiers are stable. It's very important for us to track historical changes and demography, so change of names, change of status, but also mergers, spin-offs, and so on and so forth, as many colleagues have already said before. And we have already quite a successful cooperation with ETA and the ORG-REC sister project to use and exchange data. And I think on both issues we have a very we can be very satisfied with what we have already. We have a very good systematic approach to tracking history and so on. One thing that is maybe important for us looking into the future is to find a really, especially if we will be looking at some maybe more universal, more common system of institutional identifiers, to have a really quick update or added possibility. I mean, we quite often have, of course, a quality assurance agency that has just accredited a new institution or some similar situation like that. And then, of course, we want to be able to have an identifier for that new institution as fast as possible, so that the agency doesn't need to wait before they can submit the corresponding report into DACA. We are also faced with some challenges in the field of transnational education cross-border that also Andreas has pointed to already. So of course for us it's also very important to make a distinction between physical locations of a campus on the one hand and then the legal seat of an organization and the university on the other hand, because we have more and more institutions that are part of one system but then offer education in another system. And similar to that, of course, the national typologies of institutions like universities versus colleges, polytechnics, of course, is also very relevant for us. And any kind of identifier that also tracks these kind of matters is very helpful, because quite some systems, the quality assurance requirements and the quality assurance regime actually differs between the different subsystems, different types of higher education institutions. As a last point, as for now, our scope or perimeter are really higher education institutions. So exactly the same as for the World Higher Education Database, for example. But at the same time, we increasingly see debates about micro-credentials in Europe, of course, and also about linking alternative providers of such micro-credentials to the existing frameworks and systems in higher education. And we see that some of the agencies we're working with are already offering certification or accreditation of micro-credentials or micro-credential providers that are not traditional higher education institutions, and they still align with the same agreed standards, the same ESG that we are using. So we might run into a situation that non-higher education providers, other kind of organizations, it might be companies or NGOs or whatever, might be a relevant entity for us as well in the future. I'll leave it to that for the first round, and I think I look forward to saying also a few more words about our successful cooperation with ETA and perspectives in the second round, where I think that belongs most. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. And now we would like to move to the policy level and give the word to Yann-Mael Bideau of the European Commission.
Hello everyone. I'm a policy officer at the European Commission in the Higher Education Unit of DG Education and Culture. So obviously, my work is focused on the higher education institutions, and this discussion is very important topic for us at the moment. The Commission is obviously interested in the topic of standardization as we are contributing to evidence-based policymaking by supporting various data sets, registers, and tools in the field of higher education, such as ETA, DECA, also the U-Multirank, Eurostudent, Eurograduate, the Mobility Scoreboard, to cite only few of them. And they help policymakers to be better informed about the latest developments in Europe, but also students and professionals to compare universities on the things that matters the most to them. These tools, though, have been developed over time, and this is you know where I'm going with this. They have been developed over time by different people for different purposes, often to track one type of indicators. And as a result, the identifiers that are currently in use by some of these tools were created, well, incidentally in the context of a specific application and its requirement. And they did not aim to be universally used in the first place. So we obviously encounter the same kind of issues as the one the speakers before me spoke about. Another of our big struggle is to ensure consistency between all these data sets, platforms, in terms of level of data reliability and consistent change. So from a policy perspective, what we feel today is that there is a need to work toward a more coherent framework to support efficiently our policy priorities, to monitor their impact in a more integrated way, and to provide evidence on transformation processes across the European Union. There is a wealth of data available, but it's of uneven quality, as I just said, and more importantly, it is a bit scattered everywhere. And it's a shame because EU-level monitoring is very relevant. It allows higher education institutions and member states to monitor and benchmark their performance. internationalization of higher education is a trend also that is not likely to go down in the future. So, and we need to take into account new types of cooperations, monitor their progress and impact. I'm thinking here about the European Universities Alliances, for example, which poses the question whether here there will need to be another layer of identification in the near future. This is an open question. And in order to monitor all this, we obviously need a stable list of institutions and identifiers to be able to build indicators on them and make the data available speak in a meaningful way, if I can say. And what we also see that the proliferation of data sets, platforms, registries also lead to an increased demand for data on higher education institutions themselves, because data cannot always be automatically collected at national level or international level in a harmonized way. So this is increasingly burdensome for these institutions. And we have to admit that it's not always justified by the use made of the data, notably because of the lack of interoperability between the different registries. And so maybe a better interoperability between the registries would be a relief for those institutions. And the absolute minimum of data interoperability would require agreeing on implementing on common and sustainable way to identify a European higher education institution. We need stable identifiers at the European Union level that takes into account the diversity of national systems. We are going into this direction with the Ether identifiers. We strongly encourage linking or different registries with the Ether identifiers as much as possible. And this is, of course, where the things get more complex because we need identifiers to say the same thing, covering a large perimeter of institutions, agree on what an institution is, which is more complex than it seems to be, as Benedetto mentioned in the beginning. And of course, we need interoperability with other existing international identifiers, as indeed they cannot be one, but maybe there could be less of them wherever this makes sense. So for the future, at the European Commission, we are currently reflecting on the possibility to integrate some of our existing data sets and monitoring tools for higher education under a policy focus observatory at European level that would open the way for better synergies and streamlining of the existing tools we support, rationalization of their use, and allow for easier and simplified data collection. It would also allow to integrate some research and innovation-oriented data tools under the umbrella of this observatory, such so it can cover all the missions of universities, that is education, research, innovation, and service to society. So its mission would be to provide a comprehensive central entry point, focusing on Europe and the priorities of the European education area. And this means we need to cover all types of institutions, but we don't see it as a single register for everything, but more something that would allow for more interoperability in the registry's ecosystem. So this is why I'm also looking forward to listening to all the other participants. There is a lot of synergies to be built between all of us, and I'm sure this will be very informative for us. Thank you.
And I would like to complete the round with the international perspective. OECD has engaged in an ambitious project to harmonize databases on higher education, and the issue of identification was very relevant. So I would like to give the word to Gillian Golden.
Thank you very much, Benedetto, and thank you for the opportunity to to make an intervention here today. I'd just like to give a little bit of the perspective of a user of all of these registers that you've been developing. So my name is Gillian Golden, and I'm a policy analyst with the higher education policy team in the OECD. And so part of my job is to conduct policy reviews, and part of it is to take responsibility for data and evidence development for all of the work of the higher education policy team. So I think the point that Benedetto made at the beginning in his slides about the need to move from sort of one-time data set creation to a more persistent infrastructure really encapsulates the strategic approach that we're trying to follow in the higher education policy team with respect to data development. A lot of our work is project-based, and what we do when we start a new project to date has been to basically create a new little silo that just contains the data and evidence that we need to answer the specific research questions of the project. And then when the project ends, we forget all about it and we never really get the opportunity to harness the wider value. And when we come to the next project, what we find is that we have different research questions, different timeframes. So the data that we produced previously is just never quite right. We need a different scope, we need a different perimeter, and so on. So we spend quite a bit of our resources in this cycle of data development, and we're trying to find ways to be more efficient in that regard. And at the same time, we're getting increasing demand from all of the member countries we work with to do subsystem level analysis. So when we carried out a benchmarking project back in 2017 to 2019, the participating jurisdictions were really insistent that we compare their subsectors of provision, their university sector and their professional higher education sector, and not just the system level. And we're being asked more and more to find comparator institutions across a number of countries rather than look at comparator systems. And we also see a huge increase in interest from our members in subnational data and indicators, looking at the regional level rather than just at the national level. So all of these different trends have led us to be increasingly using institution level data in our work. And so currently we're piloting what we're calling an analytical database of higher education providers. That basically is an institution level analytical database bringing together data for higher education institutions across all of the OECD countries. And I should say that our intention is not to build our own register, but actually to build a resource for our work that is fed from all of the work that you guys are doing, all of the registers, and that can support our analytical needs. And we also use this as a basis to draw in data from non-official sources. So we've been working on this project for about a year, compiling institution lists and comparing data aggregated from the institution level with system level data. Obviously, we rely heavily on the ETER database as a starting point for that, complemented with data from IPEDS and other national level institutional databases from across our membership. We've been doing some, I guess when we're talking about interoperability, we've been doing different matching exercises between what we've compiled from registers and data from other sources. And for that, we find ourselves mainly relying on fuzzy matching using different versions of institution names. And if I was to summarize from an interoperability perspective, what we've found so far, I would say that at least in the higher education institution space, it's much easier to achieve interoperability for larger accredited institutions. So these are the institutions that are much more likely to be research active. So you have this cross-referencing between the research registers and the national higher education institution registers. So you're much more likely to find information actually to cross-validate against. When it comes to smaller higher education providers, and maybe this particularly in the private sector, the interoperability challenge can become almost insurmountable. They tend to be listed on less registers, and they're much more dynamic in terms of changing structures and their names and so on. So for that reason, similar to what some of the other speakers have already indicated, we're also looking at how we can place restrictions on the data that we have and sort of on inclusion in the database according, in our case, to institution size. And we're trying as a result to assess, once we apply those restrictions, how much of each system we would be covering in our database as a result. I think Yann-Mael has already said this already, but it's difficult for me also to imagine a scenario where one institution identifier would become very widely standardized across different organization registers and data sources. So I think what we're left with are linking and reference tables for the existing proliferation of identifiers. In our case, while we can do that to link between official sources, when it comes to linking with non-official sources, we still find ourselves very much relying on the institution name. And we've been building sets of institution aliases to do this with different sources. Of course, when we're validating our database, we've come across pretty much all of the challenges that you've already all mentioned in your remarks. One major issue is being able to account for the different connections between entities. In some data sources, it may be the campus is the unit record, or the faculty, and dealing with federated institutional networks is also a challenge. And it's important then that we try to have data models in place that can properly reflect the different types of relationships between entities. And just to say a word about demography, from our perspective, it's certainly important to know about demographic events, but as users, we don't necessarily need that information to be integrated into an official register. We would tend to go deeply into the demography of a system when we actually do an in-depth country review. And in that case, we would probably use other sources rather than an organizational register. Actually, we have somewhat the opposite problem, that we sometimes find that collecting data and registering it and validating it takes time. And so when we work with policymakers, they want to work with the exact situation as it is now. And sometimes the registers can be a little bit behind where we need to be. So we actually are more interested in trying to find a way to monitor and register these demographic events sort of in real time as they occur. But we haven't to date been able to find a clear way forward to do that. And we know, of course, that this issue is an issue with all official statistics and not just register data. But I guess just from a user perspective, that's a challenge that we face. So I'll leave it at that. Looking at the time, I could say a lot more, but I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to intervene. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gillian. I think we had very, very interesting perspective. I would like to note just a couple of points. One, for the outside audience, registers are out there, and it's much easier to create interoperability between registers than to rely on matching organization at the level of individual data sets. So my first consideration is there is much more to be done by using existing registers, be it initiatives like ROR or GRID, more for the research output, or a register in higher education. The second one is there is a scope and need in this activity for documenting and comparing differences concerning the main items we discussed today. So the goals, the perimeter, the basic definitions. On the one hand, because we might then understand differences between registers, and we might then understand overlaps. And my third comment, there is a lot of scope in the sharing work between us. Because I have a good feeling that we are all reconstructing history, we are all tracking organizations, collecting information on websites, etc. And I feel by sharing, because we all know maintaining register is a time-consuming task, which requires a lot of work, we could get a benefit for everybody. Now, looking to the time, I would like to give the word for a second round of, say, feedback. We don't want to come to conclusions today. This was, in a way, a start, hopefully, of a good collaboration. We might follow the same order we had in the first time, just for conveniency. Just reacting on the overall presentation we had, and all on these points. So the importance of registers, the fact that we should be documenting and sharing methodological choices, and that there are paths probably for cooperating more. Following the same order, I think Maria is to you the word.
Yes, thank you. I'll try to be brief. I know we're coming up on time. I have one question for my fellow panelists and anyone in the audience, and that is given the global nature of ROR and what ROR is trying to do by way of identifying affiliations for research outputs. Focusing on research organizations or research producing or research associated organizations, and what ROR is trying to do with interoperability with other identifiers. I'm eager to to hear how we might better support that. And I'm also thinking a lot of how do we scale interoperability? And one of the questions we continue to get at ROR is, can you include this identifier in the ROR metadata? Can you include this other identifier in the ROR metadata? And I've been thinking a lot about how, is that a slippery slope, or can we just continue to do that ad infinitum? Or, how do we set appropriate boundaries around that to support interoperability, but also to make sure that the data set doesn't get too unwieldy or complex? Thank you.
I will follow the same order. So Andrea Reyes, it's to you to work.
So I would, I think the question from Maria is very good, but I don't have a full answer, because we're also been including the ROR IDs, but for example, we have more hospitals affiliated to university than the ones we found at ROR, and that is based on the need of our database, which is tracking research output. So I don't know if it will be if it will be good for the ROR database to include ours, or for us, we are including the numbers, but we see also that there's something missing, and I don't know if for the goals of the ROR environment, if it's good to then include our numbers. I think the best way to, I don't think we will have very easy interoperability. And I think it still will remain a little bit of extra work, and we can just assure that through really transparent documentation, open metadata, and in this documentation, how are decisions taken, how is data curated, and from that we can move on. But I don't know, I cannot see at the moment. I see the need and it will be great, but I cannot see, because of our different goals, I cannot see how we can completely match these seamlessness.
Thank you. So Maria answered kindly in the chat that this could be discussed outside this panel. The goal of this panel was also to establish such connections to make you aware of these opportunities. Andrea Cochran, to you the word.
Thank you very much. I'll be very, very brief, seeing that we have running out of time. Yes, thank you very much. This was very, very interesting indeed, seeing the plethora and the many different aspects of data provision in Europe, in the world, in the US, at OECD. I was very interested, because I think, Yann-Mael, you put it very, very clearly. We need more coherent framework. We need an integrated approach. We need to somehow organize the scattered data that is out there. So we've got many different individual organizations and actors. And how do we come together in order to try and find synergies, try and be more effective, and indeed also be more useful for the end users is really the question. And I think it is really the way forward. And many more of these kinds of discussions, with more time if possible, would be in order. So it would be wonderful maybe after this session if we could exchange more information and possibly have another meeting. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
I give immediately the word to Colin, since we are under a big time pressure.
Yes, thank you. And I would gladly join the suggestion of Andreas, maybe that given the limited time, we might want to follow up on some of these discussions with the panelists around here in a further meeting. As I said, we have a really close cooperation with ETA already. And we have used the ETA data very successfully. So I think we might not stop the proliferation of different identifiers altogether and replace them all on the world by one single one. But I do see a potential to at least limit the proliferation of identifiers, use more of them in several contexts, as Yann-Mael has said, at least in the European area and in relation to higher education, there is a clear potential for that. And we have started some discussions also together with Benedetto and ETA and Andreas and IAU to create some kind of higher education interoperable data initiative and try to get away from everyone having their own identifiers and us having to match with each other. Ideally, to have maybe one single identifier that we can use to identify higher education institutions in Europe, but at least to have to harmonize our ways of tracking and describing history and demography, maybe to an extent that at least the matching and the updating from each other can be done automatically, really without manual intervention or without having complex algorithms or complex work that needs to be done to do this kind of matching. Because I think we all have various things that we do with higher education institutions, research organizations, and data on them. But for all of us, I believe matching tables of identifiers is not our main work. And if we can avoid spending time on that and spend more time on our actual work, I think that would be welcome. So yeah, I think, yeah, we should keep trying hard, and would really be happy to be part of some further discussions following up on this panel. Thank you.
I see that's a broad agreement that this can or should be a start more than a conclusion. I give the word to Yann-Mael for a short vote.
Yeah, it will be very easy for me to be short because I completely agree with everything Colin said right now. I mean, I don't think we can reach universal interoperability between the different registers, but we can certainly work in the direction of reducing the fragmentation of the current landscape for a better use of the data by organizations, but also by higher education institutions, by students using the data, the staff, for whatever use it is. We collect so much, and unfortunately only a fragment of it is actually used. So I don't have the answer, but I would be very interested to hear if anyone has it. And this is indeed a discussion that we'll need to have between us and with more people in the near future.
You, Gillian, for you a final vote, and then I will put some conclusions or some way ahead.
Thank you, Benedetto. I will also be very, very quick. I think I could find some way of future bilateral communication with all of you. I'm really very interested in knowing more about all of your projects. I would be very interested in participating in any future meetings or other gets together of this group of people. I think perhaps what we could bring from the OECD side is something of the user perspective, as somebody who is using the data from the outside and looking at different ways to merge it together. And we definitely would be very interested in keeping in touch in this. Thank you.
I would like to propose you a couple of final points. One is this process will need different steps, and I agree with everybody. First, there will be no unique register. There is no idea of finding a solution for everybody, but because the interests are different. But we might well think there are areas which bring to more standardization. For example, it's clear higher education identifiers are an area where we have lot of commonalities and we should push forward. And then, of course, there is some more the research area, and there was a question from the participants as well about differences between research organization and higher education institutions. That's a second perspective, but the two are largely connected. And the first step is start to understand the existence and the different projects, and that's what we are starting now. And I think one part of this step should be to document more systematically the practices of each register. Another important step is disseminating, because I think the vote of Yann-Mael is very strong. We are speaking of register like everybody is using them, but the reality is that most projects dealing with research organization or higher education institutions simply start from scratch from identification. So one part of the process is explaining to the broader community. I see now we have 58 participants, that standardization is something of value, and now there are tools and there have been people working in this area, just not to restart the wheel. I think a second important process, and we are all engaged in this, and for example, in Ether or Greg, we have pushed forward this very actively in the past month, is starting to compare registers. When we start, you start comparing the World Higher Education Database with Ether for Europe, you start seeing how much overlaps there is and how much differences and what generates differences. And this is the start, the needed point. So until we don't have a clear view, and we will be matching Ether and Orgreg also with ROR and see what is in and what is out, is what Andrea Reyes said. You might discover that some research organizations are not in ROR, and then the question is whether they should be included. And this is about interchanging. And I think this is a process we have to go on in the coming years. And I'm happily taking note that everybody said you would be happy to continue this process in a different format. This was just a conference panel. And I would like to reach out to you in the coming months for some next steps, if you are available, of course. Are there any final remarks? If not, I assume everybody agrees with my conclusions. Then I would like to thank you for your time, your participation, and also for being engaged in this incredible process of harmonizing organization. As I said, when I started working in higher education and research policy, it was like organizations were simply non-existent. And now we are a big step forward, and I think we have an important way to go, both for the scholarly community and, as Gillian and Yann-Mael underscored, also for the policy value of our work. Thank you very much, and have a nice weekend.
Thanks, Benedetto. Thanks, colleagues. Bye.
Yeah, everyone. Thank you. Benedetto.